All right, so here's how it all started. I'm a single dad, 41 years old, just trying to get by and be a good dad for my daughter, who's 16 now. We've always been pretty close. At least, I thought so. I've been doing what I can to be there for her, setting up movie nights, helping her out with school stuff, just being someone she could rely on. Everything was pretty normal, or as normal as it can be raising a teenager. So one night, my daughter asks if her friend, let's call her C, can stay over. I didn't think much of it. C had been around for about a year, and she and my daughter seemed inseparable. They do all the usual things teenage girls do, like watch movies, order way too much pizza, and talk way too loud into the early hours of the morning. I figured it was just another regular sleepover. They came over and everything seemed fine. We ordered pizza, they picked some movie I didn't know, and they settled in for the night. Around midnight, I went to bed, and I didn't expect to see them until the morning. But a few hours later, I got up to go to the bathroom. My house is small, so it's just a short walk down the hall from my room. I figured I'd go, get back to bed, and that'd be that. Except when I opened the bathroom door to head back to my room, there was C, standing right there in the hall, looking like she was waiting for me. She had this look in her eyes that didn't sit right with me. Too intense, you know? I figured she just needed the bathroom, so I said, "Hey, it's all yours," and tried to step past her. But then, she lunged. I don't know how else to describe it. She just leaned in, out of nowhere, like she was trying to kiss me. My brain kind of froze for a second, like I couldn't even process what was happening. Here's this kid, my daughter's friend, practically throwing herself at me in the middle of the night. I pulled back and laughed it off, trying to keep it light so it wouldn't get awkward. I said something like, "Whoa, hey, I think you've got the wrong guy." She looked a little embarrassed, kind of mumbled something I couldn't catch, and then turned around and went back to my daughter's room. I just stood there for a second, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. But in the end, I brushed it off. I figured she was just a kid doing something impulsive and awkward, and it didn't mean anything. I chalked it up to teenage weirdness and went back to bed, thinking that was the end of it. A few days went by, and I didn't think about it again. Then, out of nowhere, I get a call from the police. They told me they needed me to come in for questioning. Now, at first, I thought maybe there'd been some sort of mistake, like they'd gotten the wrong guy, or maybe it was about something else entirely. But as soon as I got down there, I knew it was bad. The look on the detective's face said it all. He starts telling me that C had accused me of, well, of violating her. I felt like my whole world was spinning. I remember just sitting there staring at him, not even understanding what I was hearing. I kept thinking, this has to be a joke or some misunderstanding. I tried explaining what actually happened, that there was nothing to it, that I'd turned her down. But they just kept looking at me with that same expression, like they were waiting for me to slip up, to admit to something I didn't do. I went over everything again and again. I told them about the hallway, how she'd tried to kiss me, how I'd laughed it off and gone to bed. But they kept pressing, asking for details, questioning every little thing I said like they were looking for holes. I knew I was innocent, but they were treating me like I'd already been convicted. Then they asked me why she'd make something like this up. I didn't have an answer. How was I supposed to know? I didn't know what was going through her head that night, and I couldn't explain why she'd twist something so innocent into something awful. I tried my best to keep calm, but the more they questioned me, the more I started to feel like I was being trapped, like they were building a case against me based on nothing but her word. When they finally let me go, I walked out of there in a complete daze. I felt sick, like my whole life was crumbling, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. The accusation hung over me, and I knew it was going to tear everything apart. When I got home, everything felt different. I was drained, my mind running a mile a minute, and I still couldn't believe this was actually happening. I thought maybe my daughter would see through it. No, it couldn't be true. She knew me, right? But when I tried to reach her, I got nothing, just radio silence. After a day or so, I finally hear from her, but not in the way I expected. She's cut me off, blocked me on social media, the whole 9 yards. And to make it worse, she made this post just this single line that said something like, "Believe women." That was it. Nothing more, just that one line. I can't even begin to tell you how much that hurt, because here I am, fighting off these ridiculous accusations, and my own daughter has basically written me off to the world. I didn't give up, though. I texted her, tried calling, tried showing up at her mom's place to see her, but my ex wouldn't let me in. She's standing there, blocking the doorway like I'm some kind of criminal. And even though she wasn't saying much, I could see it in her eyes. She believed it too. It was like a punch to the gut. Here was this woman I used to share my life with, the mother of my child, looking at me like I was some kind of monster. Then my ex's brother. This guy who's always acted like he's got a grudge against me decides to take matters into his own hands. He comes out of nowhere, shoves me back from the door, yelling at me to get lost, calling me names. And when I tried to hold my ground, tried to say I wasn't leaving until I saw my daughter, he clocked me right in the face. One good punch, and I was on the ground, and all I could hear was him shouting at me to stay away. So now I'm sitting there outside my ex's place, bleeding and humiliated. I'm thinking, how did things get this messed up? It's like the whole world flipped in an instant. Just days before, I was this regular dad who'd do anything for his kid. Now, I'm the guy nobody trusts, the one everyone thinks is a predator. At that point, I didn't know what to do. My daughter was gone, her mom wanted nothing to do with me, and even my own friends started acting weird around me. It's like this accusation just stuck to me, no matter how false it was. And the worst part was not having my daughter. That was what cut the deepest. She didn't want to see me, talk to me, hear me out, nothing. And that's when it hit me. To her, I wasn't her dad anymore. I was just this person she wanted no part of. The days dragged on, and the police kept at it, calling me in again and again, asking the same questions like they were waiting for me to slip up. Every single time I told them the truth, but every single time I walked out of there feeling like I'd lost a piece of myself. And every time I came back to an empty house, knowing that my daughter thought of me as some kind of monster, it was killing me. I barely slept. When I did, I'd wake up in a cold sweat, thinking about all the things people might be saying behind my back, wondering if my daughter was going to spread this around, how I'd ever live this down. I'd never felt so alone in my life. Every part of me wanted to go to her, make her understand. I kept telling myself that if I could just talk to her, maybe I could get her to see reason. But every time I tried, I'd remember that look on her face when she blocked me. That look of total disgust, like I wasn't the man who raised her anymore. It was like I was invisible to her now, just erased from her life in a single move. All I could do was wait and hope that somehow, some way, the truth would come out. But sitting there alone, with everyone around me turned against me, it felt like that truth would never see the light of day. So getting called in for questioning once was rough enough, but it didn't stop there. It felt like every time I thought I'd explained myself clearly, they'd call me back in with more questions. I honestly started to feel like a criminal walking into that station every time. I'd sit down, trying to stay calm, but I could see the way the officers were looking at me, like they were just waiting for me to slip up. They'd ask things over and over, changing the wording, throwing in questions about things that had nothing to do with the actual accusation. It felt like they were just testing to see if I'd crack. The worst part was that they'd keep asking these ridiculous details, like, what were you doing on this night? Why did you let her stay over? Stuff that made me feel like they were more interested in finding something to use against me than actually listening to what I was saying. I kept thinking, how many ways can I tell you that nothing happened? I'll never forget the first time they made me sit there and give a statement. They handed me a piece of paper and told me to write down everything I could remember about that night. I'm sitting there in this tiny room, pen in hand, trying to figure out what exactly they want from me. And I mean, how do you remember every detail of a random night that seemed perfectly normal at the time? There was no reason for me to memorize every little thing because, to me, nothing even happened. I wrote what I could, told them exactly what I'd told them verbally 100 times, that I'd gotten up, gone to the bathroom, and then ran into C in the hallway. She tried to kiss me. I turned her down, and that was it. I thought it was no big deal, honestly. Just a weird moment I shrugged off, like, teenagers are awkward sometimes. But the cops? They didn't see it that way. I could see the way they exchanged looks, like they didn't believe me, and it got under my skin. Then came the harder questions. They started getting personal, asking me why I wasn't married anymore, why my daughter was even staying over at my place instead of her mom's. All these questions, like they were trying to dig up some hidden dirt on me. I couldn't help but feel like they had already made up their minds about me, that they'd decided I was guilty, and they were just waiting for me to mess up. At one point, they pulled out my daughter's statement. I didn't get to see it directly, but the way they talked about it, it broke me a little. They kept saying how she believed her friend, how she thought her friend would never make something like this up. And all I could think about was how quick she was to side against me, her own dad, without even talking to me first. It's like they were twisting the knife, reminding me that my own daughter saw me as the villain here. They even brought up my ex. They said, your ex-wife seemed pretty convinced about this too, like that somehow added more weight to the accusation. I get that divorces aren't always pretty, but we'd been decent co-parents. At least I thought so. But now it was like everyone around me was just ready to believe the worst. Each time I left that station, I was more drained than before. I'd walk out into the daylight feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My head was spinning with all these questions I couldn't answer, like how I'd even ended up here in the first place. And every time I got a call from them to come back, my stomach would drop. I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe they'd already decided to pin this on me, and nothing I said was going to change their minds. And while all this was happening, I didn't have my daughter. My own kid, the one person I thought would have my back, was completely gone from my life. I'd check my phone every day, hoping maybe she'd reached out, or even just sent a message saying she wasn't sure what to believe. But there was nothing. She was totally silent, and knowing that she'd rather believe her friend than her own father, that stung more than anything the cops could throw at me. One day they called me in and started showing me pictures. It was like they were trying to psych me out or something. They'd hold up photos, ask me to describe things that had no relevance, like the layout of my house, where people were sitting during dinner, what we talked about that night, stuff that felt completely random, but they'd watch me closely, like they were analyzing every word, waiting for me to stumble. It was a total mind game. I knew that nothing happened, that I'd done nothing wrong, but with the way they questioned me, I started second-guessing myself. I'd catch myself thinking, did I somehow mess up? Did I say something that sounded off? That's the thing about these situations. They mess with your head, make you doubt yourself, even when you know you're telling the truth. But I didn't back down. I gave them the same answers, over and over, even though I was exhausted. It felt like I was living in a nightmare where I couldn't wake up, couldn't shake this accusation that had come out of nowhere to rip my life apart. And I'd go home, alone, every night, replaying every word I'd said, every look the cops gave me, every sigh and side-eye that made me feel like I was guilty just for being there. And then there was the waiting. I'd leave the station and have days where I'd just be waiting, wondering if they'd call me back in, if they'd decided to arrest me, if they were talking to my daughter again, feeding her more reasons to stay away. It felt like I was on trial every single day, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. And all this time, there was this pit in my stomach, because I knew that if I couldn't convince them of my innocence, I'd lose everything. My daughter, my family, my whole life. Looking back, I still don't know how I got through it. I'd sit at home, staring at the wall, wondering how a single accusation could ruin everything. My world had flipped so fast, I barely had time to process it. And knowing that everyone around me was so quick to judge, so eager to believe the worst, it was a kind of pain I wouldn't wish on anyone. So yeah, that's where I was, constantly walking into that police station, facing people who didn't believe me, and then coming home to an empty house, wondering if this nightmare was ever going to end. So, after all those rounds with the police, feeling like I'm constantly trying to prove my innocence, the next blow didn't come from them. Nope, this one came straight from my own daughter, through her social media. I didn't see it right away, but I sure as hell heard about it. People started messaging me, friends calling me up, and I knew something was off before I even checked. When I finally saw it, my heart just sank. There it was, right at the top of her page. Believe women. Just those two words, posted like some sort of badge, a little nod to everyone following her that I was guilty without even saying my name. And for some people, that was all they needed to see. There's something about seeing your own kid say something like that for the world to see. Even if she didn't spell it out, everyone in our circle knew what she meant. Family, friends, acquaintances, they all knew I was the one being accused. And seeing my daughter put it out there felt like the final nail in the coffin. To her, I was guilty. End of story. I'll be honest, I stared at that post for way too long. Like maybe if I looked hard enough, it'd make sense or change somehow. It felt like betrayal in its purest form, but even more than that, it made me feel so small, so powerless. I couldn't reach her, couldn't get her to listen. And now she'd told everyone else what she thought too. There was no going back from that. Within hours, my phone started blowing up. Family members messaging me, asking what was going on, if it was true. People I hadn't talked to in years were suddenly interested in my life, like they were watching a train wreck. Some tried to keep it subtle, but it was clear. They all assumed I'd done it. Friends, neighbors, people from work. Everyone knew someone who'd seen it, and it was like I had this giant scarlet letter pinned to my name. And it's not like I could even defend myself. Anything I said would probably just look like a guilty person trying to cover their tracks. Plus, with everything still being investigated, the police told me I was better off staying quiet. So here I am, watching my life get ripped apart online, and I can't say a damn thing. Then came the messages, some from complete strangers. People accusing me, calling me all kinds of disgusting names, telling me what a monster I was. I got death threats, People saying I should rot in jail, that I was everything wrong with the world. They were sending me paragraphs of pure hate, and I had to sit there, powerless to defend myself. My daughter, meanwhile, was still silent. Nothing from her directly, no calls, no texts, just that post for everyone to see. And every time I checked her page, it was still there, with people flooding her comments with support. "You're so brave," they said. "You're doing the right thing." Nobody stopped to think for a second that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't guilty. That I might actually be the one telling the truth. The people I thought were friends disappeared. A few reached out, probably just to satisfy their curiosity, but it was clear they didn't believe me either. One of my closest friends, someone I'd known for years, didn't even bother to call. He just sent a single message that said, "Hope it's not true, man." Hope it's not true? That's all he had to say? It felt like everyone I'd ever trusted had vanished or turned against me in a matter of days. And my daughter's post stayed up. I kept hoping she'd take it down, that maybe she'd have second thoughts, that someone would talk sense into her. But it just stayed there, like a billboard reminding everyone who followed her that I was supposed to be a monster. One day, I actually considered posting something myself. I typed out this long, angry message defending myself, saying how much it hurt to be judged without any proof. But every time I looked at it, I thought about how it'd look to everyone else. They'd see it as damage control, or an angry man trying to intimidate his daughter. No one would listen to a word I said. They'd twist it, make it seem like I was trying to guilt trip her or pressure her into silence. So I deleted it, and I just sat there, feeling completely helpless. In the days that followed, I couldn't go anywhere without feeling the weight of that post. I'd run into people who knew about it, and they'd avoid eye contact or just stare, clearly wondering if they were looking at a criminal. People at work started acting weird around me, too, like they didn't know what to say. And to top it all off, a couple of my neighbors started avoiding me. I'd wave, and they'd pretend they didn't see me, just hurrying back into their homes like I had some kind of disease. I'd check her profile every day, hoping maybe she'd taken it down, but she didn't. And the longer it stayed, the more people joined in. It became this rallying point, people applauding her bravery for speaking up or saying she was taking a stand. I wanted to scream, to tell them that she hadn't spoken to me, hadn't even tried to hear my side. But I knew that'd just make things worse. It's like the more I stayed silent, the guiltier I looked. But saying anything would make it worse. So I was just stuck, unable to do anything except watch my reputation go up in flames. My own daughter had painted me as a predator, and the rest of the world was eating it up like some kind of twisted drama. And what was I supposed to do? Some nights I'd lay awake, thinking about what I could say to her, how I could explain how much this was destroying me. But then I'd remember she wasn't answering, that even if I got a hold of her, she probably wouldn't listen. In her mind, she'd already decided who I was. And the worst part? Everyone else had too. I used to think social media was just a place to catch up with people, share photos, and maybe laugh at some stupid memes. I never thought it would be the thing that ripped my life apart, and now here I was, watching as my own daughter's post dragged my name through the mud, while people cheered her on, oblivious to what the truth actually was. I was officially alone, and no one cared. After weeks of living in a nightmare, answering the same questions over and over, the day finally came when I got another call from the detective. This time, though, he didn't sound like he was ready to go another round with me. There was something different in his voice, something almost, I don't know, cautious. He told me to come down to the station because they had an update on the case. At this point, I didn't know what to expect anymore. I figured it was just more of the same, more questions, more accusations, more waiting around while they picked apart my story like I'd done something wrong. But I went in, sat down, and waited. The detective looked at me for a moment, then leaned forward, almost like he was preparing me for what he was about to say. He cleared his throat and said, "We've been re-interviewing C. She's changed her story." Those words hit me like a brick. My first thought was that it was about to get worse, that somehow she'd found a way to dig the hole even deeper. But then he went on. He explained that they'd been pushing her for more details, something solid to back up her accusation, and apparently, things didn't add up. They'd started noticing inconsistencies, things that she'd left out before, details she couldn't keep straight. And when they pressed her on it, she began to stumble, backtracking on certain parts of her story. He said she'd gotten flustered, couldn't keep the timeline straight, couldn't remember what she'd already told them. At first, they thought it was just nerves, but the more they pushed, the shakier she got. Then he said they noticed something. Her entire story was starting to fall apart. They kept asking her to clarify, to give them one clear, consistent version of events. Every time she tried, she'd mess up, say something different than she had before. Eventually, she froze up, went silent, and that's when they really leaned into her. The detective said they pressured her, reminded her of the seriousness of what she was saying, how important it was to tell the truth. And that's when she cracked. According to the detective, C broke down in tears and admitted that none of it was true, that I hadn't done a thing to her. She confessed that the real reason she'd accused me was because of her mom's boyfriend. He was the one who'd hurt her, but she couldn't bring herself to accuse him directly. She was scared of him, felt trapped, and didn't know what else to do. She said that pointing the finger at me had seemed easier, safer somehow, since I wasn't really part of her life. When I heard those words, I didn't feel the relief I'd been waiting for. I felt a wave of anger, frustration, and hurt that I couldn't even describe. All this pain, all the sleepless nights, the way my own daughter had turned against me, it was all because I was the safe option to blame. C had completely turned my life upside down because she didn't want to face the real monster in her life. The detective went on, explaining that they were officially clearing my name and closing the case. Legally, I was off the hook. I wouldn't be arrested, wouldn't have to worry about charges hanging over my head. But as he spoke, it all felt so hollow. Sure, I was cleared in the eyes of the law, but what about everything else? My reputation, my relationships, the trust my own daughter had shattered, all of that was still in ruins. The detective could tell me I was free as much as he wanted, but it didn't change the fact that everything I cared about had already been ripped apart. I barely remember leaving the station. I must have driven home in a fog, replaying the detective's words in my mind, trying to make sense of it all. When I got home, I just sat on the couch, staring at the wall, feeling completely numb. The truth had finally come out, but it didn't fix a damn thing. I kept thinking about how easily C had turned me into her scapegoat, how quick she'd been to ruin my life because it was easier for her. And the worst part? She'd done it without a second thought, without any care for the destruction she was leaving behind. I thought about my daughter, how fast she'd believed the lie, how quickly she'd shut me out and posted about believing women, as if I was guilty without a doubt. For days after, I couldn't shake this feeling of emptiness. Sure, the accusation was gone, but the damage was done. Friends, family, everyone who'd once been in my corner had treated me like I was a monster. I'd been forced into this horrible isolation, and now they expected me to just pick up and carry on like none of it had happened. And then, of course, the calls started coming in. Mostly from family and people who suddenly wanted to talk after ignoring me for weeks. But I just wasn't in the mood. I couldn't shake the anger, the emptiness. The one message that really got to me was from my daughter, though. She left me a long voicemail. The second I saw it, I just stared at my phone, not sure if I wanted to listen to it. Part of me wanted to delete it right then. I mean, she'd already said everything she needed to say when she posted that believe women thing. I felt like, at that point, her loyalty was clear. But another part of me, the dad part, wanted to give her a chance. I guess there was still a part of me that hoped she had some explanation that would make this whole thing make sense. I hit play, and her voice came through, shaky and hesitant. She started off with, "Dad, I'm sorry." Right away, I felt that stab of hurt all over again. Sorry? She was sorry? That was supposed to cover the weeks of hell I went through? But I kept listening, even though every word felt like salt in a wound. She talked about how C was her best friend, how close they were, and how she felt like she had to believe her. She said something like, "I didn't think someone would lie about something like that, especially someone I trusted so much." Her voice was cracking, and I could hear that she was crying by the end of it. She was saying all these things about how she missed me, how she'd been scared and confused, and how now she felt guilty. I wish I could say it made me feel better. I wish I could say hearing her apologize took away all the pain and anger I'd been carrying around. But it didn't. All I could think about was how fast she'd been to throw me under the bus. There was no hesitation, no, "Dad, can we talk?" Nothing. She'd heard one accusation and went straight to condemning me, making me out to be the monster in the story. Her voicemail ended with her saying she wanted to come over and talk face to face. She said she needed to see me, to make things right. She kept saying how sorry she was, like repeating it would fix everything. But all it did was make me feel even emptier. Hearing her voice, knowing she was hurting now, didn't bring me any satisfaction. It didn't undo the fact that she'd already decided I was guilty before anyone even got a chance to investigate. That evening, I sat on the couch, phone in my hand, just staring at her name in my contacts. I kept asking myself if I should give her a chance, let her come over and try to explain herself in person. But every time I thought about it, I felt this wall go up. I couldn't shake the betrayal. My own kid had judged me without hesitation, and now, after it was all over, she wanted to talk? Around 8 o'clock, there was a knock on my door. I didn't even have to check. I knew it was her. She'd been texting all day, saying she was on her way and asking if I'd please let her in. But when I heard her voice pleading on the other side of the door, I couldn't bring myself to answer. I just sat there, feeling this mix of anger and sadness. She stayed outside for a while, knocking, calling my name. I could hear her through the door saying, "Dad, please, I need to talk to you." But I couldn't do it. Every part of me wanted to open the door, to just hug her, forgive her, tell her everything would be okay. But then I'd remember all those nights I spent alone, knowing she'd chosen to believe the worst of me. It was like I was stuck between being her dad and being a stranger she'd hurt, and I didn't know which one I was supposed to be. After a while, she left, and I thought maybe that would be the end of it. But the messages kept coming. She'd text me long apologies, saying she couldn't believe what she'd done, how sorry she was, how she needed to make things right. And I wanted to believe her, to believe that she was truly sorry. But how was I supposed to just erase everything? It wasn't just a mistake. It was a decision she'd made over and over again for weeks. She'd ignored me, blocked me, even posted publicly that she believed in her friend's accusation without a second thought. And now she wanted a clean slate? I couldn't wrap my head around how she could even ask for that, let alone expect it. At one point, she sent a message saying, "Dad, please don't hate me." And that hit me harder than I expected. Because the truth is, I don't hate her. I never could. She's my kid. And even though she ripped my heart out, I still love her. That's what made it hurt so much in the first place. If she were just some random person, it would have been easier to shake off. But she was my daughter. The one person in the world I thought would have my back no matter what. I spent a lot of nights thinking about whether I should forgive her, whether I could let her back into my life without feeling this constant sting of betrayal. But every time I thought about it, I'd remember the look in her eyes when she blocked me, the coldness in her voice when she said she didn't want to talk. Those memories were burned into my mind, and no amount of apologies seemed to make them go away. So I just stayed silent. I couldn't bring myself to answer her texts, to pick up the phone when she called. I didn't know if I'd ever be ready to have that conversation, to let her back in. I needed time, space to process everything, without feeling like I had to forgive her right away. And I know that might make me sound like the bad guy, like I'm being too harsh. But after everything I'd been through, I felt like I deserved a moment to breathe, to put myself back together without rushing into a forgiveness I wasn't ready for. She'd already moved on, already felt like she'd done her part by apologizing. But for me, the damage was still fresh. In the end, I sent her a short message. I told her I needed space, that I couldn't see her right now, and that I'd reach out when I was ready. It wasn't the answer she wanted, and I knew it probably hurt her, but it was the truth. I wasn't ready to open that door again, not yet. And maybe, just maybe, that was okay. So after I told my daughter I needed some space, I thought things would calm down, at least for a little while. I figured I'd get some time to process, get my head straight without constantly thinking about the betrayal. But that peace lasted all of about a day before the texts, calls, and messages started coming in again, this time from the family. It started with my mom. She's never been one to stay quiet, especially when it comes to family stuff. She called me, saying she'd heard about everything and was worried sick about me. I get it, I really do. But as soon as I picked up, it was clear she wasn't calling to check on me as much as she was calling to talk me into forgiving my daughter. She went on and on, saying things like, "You know how teenagers are? And she's young, she made a mistake." I tried to explain to her that this wasn't some small slip-up, that my daughter had destroyed my reputation, dragged me through the mud, and left me to pick up the pieces. But my mom wasn't having it. She kept pushing, saying, "But she's your daughter." Like that alone should be enough to erase everything. In her mind, family forgives family no matter what. Then my sister jumped in. She's a little younger than me, and we've always been close, but she took my daughter's side, too. I mean, she didn't say it directly, but her texts made it pretty obvious. She'd send me these long messages about how hard this must be for my daughter, how guilty she feels, how I need to be the bigger person. Bigger person? She was the one who threw me under the bus. But no matter how many times I tried to explain, my sister kept coming back with the same thing. She's young. She was scared. I wanted to scream. Everyone acted like I was the one overreacting, like I was supposed to just shove all my hurt and anger aside because she's my kid. My sister even had the nerve to say, "If you don't forgive her, you're going to lose her for good." Lose her? She was the one who left me, blocked me, publicly posted about me being guilty before I'd even had a chance to defend myself. But now that she's feeling guilty, I'm just supposed to let her back in without question? My mom called again the next day, and this time she tried another approach. She went on about how family's all we have, and how this is a teachable moment for my daughter. A teachable moment? I'm still trying to get back to feeling normal, still living with the emotional scars from all this, and she's acting like it's some kind of life lesson for my kid. It was like everyone saw this as a learning opportunity for her and a minor inconvenience for me. And then there was my ex-wife. I hadn't heard from her much directly since all this started, which was honestly fine with me, but suddenly she was blowing up my phone too. She left a voicemail saying we needed to sit down as a family and work this out. Yeah, like it's that easy. The whole reason I was in this mess was because she too chose to believe the accusations without question. She didn't let me in the house, didn't listen to a word I said, and now she thinks we can just have a family meeting to work things out. I'll admit, hearing everyone gang up on me like that made me feel like I was losing my mind. I was still carrying all this hurt, all this anger, and every single person around me was acting like I was the one dragging things out, like I was supposed to just move on. They kept telling me things like, she's only a kid, and she didn't know any better. But that wasn't an excuse to me. She knew well enough to go on social media and accuse me without a second thought. She knew well enough to cut me off, block me, shut me out. She knew what she was doing then, but now that it's over, everyone's pretending she's innocent. My aunt even got involved. I think she means well, but she's always been one of those peace at any cost types. She sent me this long email saying how important it is to heal as a family and how I should set an example of forgiveness. Honestly, reading that email made me feel sick. She went on about how forgiveness is strength and all this stuff that sounded more like a Hallmark card than actual advice. None of them wanted to understand what I'd gone through. They just wanted me to forgive and forget to make it easier for everyone else. After a week of this, I couldn't take it anymore. I messaged my mom and sister in our family group chat and told them I needed space. I said, I understand you're worried about my daughter, but you need to understand that I'm hurt too. I can't just let this go overnight. I thought maybe they'd respect that. Maybe they'd back off and give me the time I needed to figure out my own feelings. But nope. My mom just doubled down saying how holding on to grudges was only going to hurt me in the long run. She kept going on about how I needed to be a good role model, and all that did was make me feel worse. I wasn't holding a grudge. I was just trying to heal, trying to deal with everything that had happened. But they made it sound like I was being stubborn or petty. Then my sister jumped in, saying I needed to think of the long term and how I might regret pushing my daughter away. It was like they'd all rehearsed the same script, telling me over and over how I'd lose her if I didn't forgive her now, immediately. No one stopped to think about what I'd already lost, what she'd put me through, what it felt like to be completely alone in this. I ended up muting the group chat for a few days, just to get some peace. But even then, they found ways to get through to me. My mom came by the house one evening, just showed up at my door like she was dropping by for a casual visit. She sat me down and gave me this whole speech about letting go of the anger. She even said, "You'll feel so much better when you forgive her." And maybe she's right. Maybe forgiveness would feel good someday, but not now. Not when everything still feels so raw. My aunt called that same night, saying how everyone was worried about me. I felt like a broken record, telling her over and over that I just needed space. But she kept pushing, saying, "Don't let this tear the family apart." Tear the family apart? The family had already fallen apart the second they all believed I was guilty. That damage was done, and it wasn't my responsibility to patch it up just because they were feeling guilty now. By the end of the week, I was just tired. Tired of explaining myself, tired of justifying my feelings, tired of everyone making it about how I needed to be the bigger person. I kept thinking about how none of them had even given me a chance when the accusations first came out. They'd all assumed the worst, just like my daughter did. But now, they wanted me to be the one to fix things, to make it easier for them. In the end, I decided to keep my boundaries. I told them I wasn't ready, that I didn't know when I would be, and that they needed to respect that. And honestly, it was hard. It was hard to push back against my own family, against people I'd always trusted. But I knew that if I caved now, if I forgave before I was ready, I'd just be carrying even more hurt. Maybe someday I'll feel differently. Maybe someday I'll be able to open that door again. But for now, I just need some time. And if they can't understand that, then maybe they never really understood me at all. Last update. After everything, I realized I couldn't stay here. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of what I'd been through. The judgment, the betrayal, the family and friends who'd turned on me without a second thought. I decided the only way to truly move forward was to leave it all behind. So I made the decision to sell my house, pack up, and move somewhere far away. I don't know where I'm going yet, but I know I need a fresh start. A clean slate where I can finally breathe again. As hard as it was, I cut off my daughter, my family, everyone who turned on me. This whole nightmare showed me just how little they thought of me, how easily they believed the worst with barely a question. For weeks I waited, hoping they'd reach out, that someone would stand by me, but they didn't. And now that the truth is out, they suddenly want to make amends, like a few apologies could erase the pain I went through. But I can't pretend this never happened. I can't just pick up the pieces like nothing's changed. Maybe in this new place I'll have a chance to build something better. Maybe I'll even find people who will actually stand by me. People I can trust to see me for who I am, not who they fear I might be. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I can't spend it surrounded by people who saw me as disposable. I'm done with people who abandoned me when I needed them most. So yeah, that's it. A new beginning, far from anyone who let me down. It's scary, but I'm ready to find a place where I can finally feel at peace again.
The sound of packing tape ripping through silence feels like someone tearing apart my life, strip by methodical strip. I stand frozen in our bedroom doorway, watching Mark seal another cardboard box. He hasn't noticed me yet, too focused on his careful labeling system, the same attention to detail that once made me fall in love with him. I'm Clara, and this is the moment my marriage ends. Not with the dramatic flair of a soap opera, but with the mundane sound of packing tape and marker squeaks. Were you planning to tell me, or just disappear while I was at work? My voice comes out steadier than I feel. Mark startles, dropping the marker. It rolls under our bed, the bed we picked out together at that overpriced furniture store his mother hated. You're home early. Clearly not early enough. I step into the room, my heels clicking against hardwood. Each step feels like I'm walking through molasses. How long have you been planning this? He doesn't answer immediately, just runs his hands through his hair. A nervous tick I used to find endearing. Clara, we both know this isn't working. Do we? Because I must have missed that conversation. I pick up one of his precisely labeled boxes. Winter clothes. It reads in his perfect architect's handwriting. When exactly did we decide this? Mother thinks. Of course. I laugh, but it sounds more like breaking glass. Vivian thinks. Vivian says. Vivian knows best. Tell me, Mark, do you even breathe without checking with her first? His face hardens. That's not fair. Fair? I set the box down hard enough to make him wince. Fair would be having an actual conversation about our marriage before you started packing it away in neat little boxes. Fair would be acknowledging that I'm your wife, not some temporary inconvenience standing between you and your mother's approval. You're being dramatic. He turns back to his packing, a dismissive gesture that ignites something fierce in my chest. Mother simply pointed out that our financial situations are fine. My business is growing. We're not struggling. Your little design projects aren't exactly reliable income. My little projects paid for half this house. I grab the box he's working on, dumping his carefully folded shirts onto the floor. And they'd be doing even better if your mother hadn't scared away 3 of my biggest clients last month. He freezes. What are you talking about? Oh, you didn't know. Funny how the Hendersons, the Patels, and Brighton Corp all suddenly pulled their contracts after meeting with your mother about property investments. I start counting on my fingers. The same mother who just happens to be pushing you to leave because I'm financially unstable. Mark's face pales slightly, but he recovers quickly. You're paranoid. Mother would never... Stop saying mother like she's some kind of saint. I grab another box, this one labeled Important Documents. Let's see what else she's been orchestrating, shall we? He lunges for the box, but I'm faster. Inside, beneath bank statements and insurance papers, I find a folder I've never seen before. The contents make my blood run cold. Detailed reports of my business dealings, copies of emails between my clients, even photos of me meeting with competitors. She's been having me followed? My hands shake as I flip through the papers. It's not what you think. Mark reaches for the folder, but I step back. Mother was just concerned about our future. She wanted to make sure that I was properly destroyed before you left me. I clutch the folder to my chest. How long have you known about this? His silence is answer enough. Get out! My voice is ice now, all the heat of anger crystallizing into something harder. Take your boxes and get out. But these... I wave the folder. These stay with me. Clara, please. I said get out! I throw the empty box at him. It bounces harmlessly off his chest, but he flinches as if I'd struck him. Go run to Mommy. Tell her she won, but make sure you tell her something else too. I step closer, lowering my voice. Tell her she just made the biggest mistake of her life. Mark stares at me for a long moment, then silently begins gathering his boxes. As he walks past me, he pauses. I'm sorry it ended this way. No, I say, watching him leave. You're not sorry it ended this way. You're just sorry I found out this way. The front door closes with a quiet click, but in my mind, it echoes like a gunshot. I sink onto our bed, my bed now, still clutching the folder of surveillance reports. Tears burn behind my eyes, but I refuse to let them fall. Instead, I open my phone and dial. Sophie, I need your help. It's time to make Vivian regret ever hearing my name. Sophie arrives with 2 bottles of wine and a determined expression that tells me she's already formulating plans. I've spent the last hour spreading the surveillance photos across my dining room table like some twisted puzzle. This is next-level crazy, Sophie says, examining a photo of me having lunch with the Hendersons last month. Who does this? Someone who's been planning to destroy me for years. I pour us both generous glasses of red. Look at the timestamps. She's been collecting these since before Mark and I even got married. Sophie picks up another photo. Wait, isn't this from your first meeting with Brighton Corp? 3 weeks ago, right before they mysteriously backed out of our contract. The wine tastes bitter. Vivian's fingerprints are all over it, but I can't prove anything, yet. My phone buzzes. Mark's number. I silence it. He's called 4 times today, Sophie notes, watching me. Maybe you should. What? Listen to more excuses? Watch him try to justify why his mother having me stalked was somehow for my own good? I grab one of the surveillance reports. Did you know she had someone track my business expenses for the past year? Every client meeting, every supply purchase, every late-night design session, all carefully documented to paint me as financially irresponsible. The doorbell rings. Sophie and I exchange glances. If that's Mark, I swear. I start, but Sophie's already heading to the door. I hear murmured voices, then Sophie returns with an envelope. Special delivery from the Dragon Lady herself. The envelope is heavy, expensive paper, with Clara, written in Vivian's precise handwriting. Inside is an invitation to her annual charity gala next weekend, along with a handwritten note. Dear Clara, I trust you'll handle this unfortunate situation with the dignity expected of someone who was, however briefly, part of our family. The gala would be an excellent opportunity to demonstrate that maturity. Vivian. She can't be serious, Sophie says, reading over my shoulder. I start laughing, the sound sharp and hollow. Oh, she's serious. This is what she does. Turns everything into a public performance. She wants to show everyone how graciously she's handling her son's failed marriage. You're not going. Of course I'm going. I grab my laptop. In fact, I'm going to make sure it's a night Vivian never forgets. Sophie sits beside me. Clara, wait. What are you thinking? I pull up my client list. Remember Thomas Chen, the tech millionaire whose startup I did branding for last year? The one Vivian tried to poach for her new development project? Exactly. He's been looking to invest in more properties, and I happen to know exactly where Vivian's weak spots are. I start typing an email. It's time to show her what my little design projects can really do. Clara. Sophie's voice is gentle. Are you sure you want to play her game? This woman's been manipulating people for decades. I'm not playing her game. I hit send. I'm starting my own. She wants to talk about financial stability. Let's see how stable her empire is when I start picking it apart, piece by piece. My phone buzzes again. Mark. This time I answer. Clara, please, he starts. Mother says, I got the invitation. I cut him off. Tell her I'll be there. You will? He sounds surprised, then suspicious. Why? Because that's what family does, right? Shows up for important events? I keep my voice sweet, knowing Vivian's probably listening. I wouldn't want to disappoint your mother. There's a long pause. Clara, whatever you're planning. Goodbye, Mark. Give my love to your mother. I hang up and find Sophie watching me with concern. You know this could get ugly. It already is ugly. I pull up another email, this one from the Hendersons, canceling a project we'd been planning for months. Vivian just doesn't realize it yet. My phone pings with a response from Thomas Chen. He's interested in meeting. Perfect, I murmur, then look at Sophie. Want to help me pick out a dress for the gala? Something that says, loving daughter-in-law, but also, I know where the bodies are buried? Sophie sighs, but reaches for her wine. You're really going to do this? I look at the surveillance photos spread across my table, each one a reminder of Vivian's careful, calculated destruction of my life. She thought she could break me down slowly, make me look like the unstable one who couldn't handle marriage to her precious son. I smile, and it feels dangerous. Time to show her what happens when you corner someone with nothing left to lose. The meeting with Thomas Chen takes place in a sleek downtown cafe, far from Vivian's usual haunts. He's exactly as I remember, sharp-eyed and direct, with no patience for small talk. Your proposal is interesting, he says, sliding through my presentation on his tablet. But I have to ask, why come to me specifically? I take a careful sip of espresso. Because you understand the value of disruption, Mr. Chen. And because Vivian Harrison tried to manipulate you last year. His expression doesn't change, but his fingers stop moving across the screen. Go on. She attempted to use your interest in the Riverside development to pressure other investors. When that failed, she spread rumors about your company's financial stability. I pull out my phone, showing him the relevant emails from my surveillance file. She cost you that deal. And now you're suggesting we work together to cost her something in return. He studies me over his cup. This feels personal. Everything Vivian does is personal. That's her weakness. I lean forward. The Davidson project she's been bragging about? It's built on false projections. I have proof. Before he can respond, movement near the cafe's entrance catches my eye. Mark walks in with his realtor friend, James. They haven't noticed me yet. Excuse me, I murmur to Thomas, sliding lower in my seat. But it's too late. Clara? Mark sounds surprised, then suspicious as he spots Thomas. What are you doing here? I straighten up, forcing a smile. Business meeting. You remember Thomas Chen? Mark's face pales slightly. Mr. Chen, I didn't realize you and Clara were acquainted. We go way back, Thomas says smoothly. Your wife's talent for spotting opportunities is remarkable. Ex-wife, Mark corrects quickly. And speaking of opportunities, I hope she mentioned that any business ventures in this area should really go through Vivian, I interrupt. Like the Riverside deal did? James tugs at Mark's sleeve. We're going to be late for that appointment. Actually, Thomas stands, gathering his things. I believe we're finished here. Clara, I'll have my team draw up the contracts. Your insight into local dynamics has been invaluable. After they leave, Mark rounds on me. What are you doing? Business, I repeat. You know, those little projects your mother's so concerned about? Stop it! He grabs my arm as I try to leave. Whatever you're planning with Chen. I wrench away. Don't touch me. You lost the right to question my business decisions when you let your mother destroy them. She was trying to protect our family's interests. Your family's interests. My laugh draws stares from nearby tables. Tell me, Mark, did those interests include having me followed, photographed, having my clients threatened? He runs a hand through his hair. That familiar gesture that used to mean stress, but now just reminds me of manipulation. It wasn't like that. Mother only wanted... I know exactly what she wanted. I gather my things, hands shaking slightly. And now she's going to get it. Just not the way she expected. My phone buzzes. Sophie, sending details about the charity gala. Another message pops up from Thomas. Meeting set with Davidson investors. Tomorrow. Clara? Mark's voice has softened. Please don't do anything rash. Mother can make things very difficult. More difficult than destroying my marriage? My business? My reputation? I show him the surveillance photos on my phone. How much more difficult can it get, Mark? He stares at the photos, recognition flickering across his face. Where did you get these? From the files you left behind. The ones documenting every move I've made for the past 3 years. I lean closer, dropping my voice. Did you enjoy reading them? Did you and Vivian sit together, planning how to break me down piece by piece? It wasn't. I didn't. He stops, looking lost. I just wanted everyone to be happy. Well, congratulations. Your mother's happy. You're free to be her perfect son again. I start walking away, then pause. Oh, and Mark? Tell her I'm looking forward to the gala. I have so many people I want to introduce her to. Outside, I take deep breaths of cold air until my hands stop shaking. Thomas's message still glows on my screen, promising the first real crack in Vivian's carefully constructed empire. My phone buzzes again. Sophie. How did it go? She asks. I watch through the cafe window as Mark makes a call, his movements agitated. Probably warning Vivian. Better than expected, I answer. The game's changing, Sophie, and Vivian's about to learn she's not the only one who knows how to play. The Davidson investors meeting feels like a chess match, where every piece is made of glass. I sit quietly, watching Thomas Chen methodically dissect Vivian's project projections, while her face grows increasingly rigid. These numbers seem optimistic, Thomas says, tapping the spreadsheet, particularly given the current market conditions. I notice Vivian's perfectly manicured nails digging into her leather portfolio. She doesn't look at me, but I feel her awareness of my presence, like static electricity. The projections are sound, she replies smoothly. I've personally overseen every aspect of this development, so including the environmental impact reports. I slide a folder across the table, because these documents tell a rather different story. The room temperature seems to drop 10 degrees. Vivian's eyes finally meet mine, and I see something I've never witnessed before. Fear. Where did you get those? Her voice remains steady, but her knuckles are white. The same place you got your surveillance photos of me. I maintain eye contact. Interesting what people will share when they realize they're not the only ones you've manipulated. Thomas clears his throat. Ladies, perhaps we should focus on... This meeting is over. Vivian stands abruptly. These allegations are baseless and... Sit down, Vivian. The command comes from Robert Davidson himself, silent until now. I'd like to hear more about these discrepancies. My phone buzzes. A text from Sophie. 911. Mark at your house. Something wrong. I force myself to stay seated, even as my stomach twists. The environmental reports were altered, I continue, to hide contamination from previous industrial use. The cleanup costs alone would triple your projected expenses. That's impossible, Vivian snaps. Those reports were confidential, like the photos of me meeting clients, or the financial records you used to convince Mark I was unstable. My phone buzzes again. I ignore it. Robert Davidson leans forward. Mrs. Harrison, is there something you'd like to explain? The meeting dissolves into technical discussions and legal implications. I slip out during a heated exchange about soil samples, my phone now vibrating constantly. Mark is sitting on my porch steps, head in his hands. He looks up as I approach, and my sharp words die in my throat. His face is ashen. What happened? Mother had a heart attack. His voice is hollow. Right after some meeting, they took her to St. Mary's. The triumph I'd felt moments ago curdles in my stomach. Is she stable for now? He stands, swaying slightly. She was asking for you. I bark out a laugh. Me? Why would she? Because she knows. Mark's eyes are red-rimmed. About everything. The Davidson deal, Thomas Chen, the environmental reports. She said she underestimated you. My hands start shaking. Mark, did you know? He steps closer. About the contamination. About how exposing it wouldn't just ruin her, but everyone connected to the project? Including me? The pieces click together with sickening clarity. Of course, Vivian would have ensured Mark was legally entangled in the development. Of course, she'd use him as a shield. I stop, remembering all those nights I'd spent plotting, focusing only on Vivian. Had I become just like her, willing to destroy anything in my path? My phone rings. Sophie again. Clara, the Davidson story just broke online. It's bad. Really bad. I watch Mark's face as he receives a text, probably containing the same news. He looks like a man watching his world burn. I have to go, he says quietly. Mother's asking for her lawyers. He pauses at the bottom of the steps. You know what's funny? She always said you weren't strong enough for this family. Guess she was wrong about that too. After he leaves, I sit on the porch steps, staring at my phone as notifications flood in. The story is spreading fast. Vivian Harrison, prominent developer, caught in environmental scandal. Her empire beginning to crack. I should feel victorious. Instead, I remember the fear in her eyes at the meeting, so similar to what I'd felt when discovering Mark's packed boxes. The way revenge has turned me into someone who could hurt others without flinching. Sophie's car pulls up. She takes one look at my face and sits beside me. What have I done? I whisper. She takes my hand. Exactly what she taught you to do. My phone lights up with another call, this time from Thomas Chen, probably wanting to discuss damage control, next steps, the pieces of Vivian's empire now up for grabs. I let it ring. St. Mary's Hospital smells like artificial lemons and regret. I've been sitting in the waiting room for an hour, turning my phone over and over in my hands, watching news alerts pile up about the Davidson scandal. Each headline feels like another brick in a wall I can't tear down. You didn't have to come. Mark's voice startles me. He looks exhausted, suit wrinkled like he's been sleeping in it. Your text said she's asking for me. She is. He runs a hand through his hair, though I'm not sure if that's a good thing. The walk to Vivian's private room feels endless. Through the window, I see her propped up in bed, looking smaller somehow. Vulnerable. It's unsettling, like seeing a lion with its teeth pulled. Clara! Her voice is weaker than usual, but her eyes are sharp as ever. Close the door. Mark hesitates. Mother, maybe we should... Out. One word, but it carries all her usual authority. He leaves, shoulders slumped. I remain standing, keeping my distance. You wanted to see me? Sit. She gestures to the chair beside her bed. We need to discuss terms. Terms? I almost laugh. I'm not here to negotiate. No? She picks up her phone, taps something, then shows me the screen. My breath catches. It's an email chain between Mark and several Davidson project investors, dating back months. His signature on documents he shouldn't have signed. Proof of his involvement in the cover-up. You really think I wouldn't have insurance? Her smile is thin. Mark's fingerprints are all over this. One call, and he goes down with me. My hands clench. You'd destroy your own son? To protect him from himself? In a heartbeat. She sets the phone down. The question is, would you? The monitor beeps steadily in the silence. Through the window, I see Mark pacing in the hallway, phone pressed to his ear. Probably talking to lawyers already. What do you want? Retraction, public statement claiming your evidence was misconstrued. Technical error in the environmental reports. She lists each point like she's ordering dinner. In exchange, these emails disappear. My phone buzzes. Thomas Chen again. I've been dodging his calls since the story broke. And if I refuse? Then Mark faces criminal charges. His career, his reputation, everything gone. She adjusts her position, wincing slightly. You've proven your point, Clara. You're stronger than I thought. But ask yourself, is revenge worth destroying the man you once loved? Before I can answer, there's a commotion in the hallway. Sophie bursts in, ignoring the nurse's protests. Clara, don't say anything else. She waves her tablet. The Davidson Group just released their own statement. They're claiming full responsibility for the environmental cover-up. They're saying Vivian was misled too. Vivian's monitor spikes briefly. What? Sophie continues. Thomas Chen's team found evidence that Davidson's own environmental department falsified initial reports before bringing you in. They're taking the fall to avoid bigger investigations. I watch the color drain from Vivian's face as she processes this. Her perfect insurance policy, worthless. Mark's involvement, now a minor footnote in someone else's scandal. You should rest, Vivian. I stand, finally meeting her eyes. Stress isn't good for your heart. She grabs my wrist as I turn to leave. Her grip is surprisingly strong. This isn't over. Actually, it is. I gently remove her hand. You taught me well. Always have a backup plan. Always be 3 steps ahead. The Davidson Group owes me a favor from an old project. Calling it in was expensive, but worth it. You couldn't have known that you'd try to sacrifice your own son to save yourself? I move toward the door. Maybe not, but I knew you'd try something. You're predictable that way. In the hallway, Mark stares at me like he's seeing me for the first time. The Davidson statement. Did you? You should call your lawyer, I tell him. Make sure you're protected when they start official investigations. And Mark? I pause, feeling the weight of Vivian's glare through the window. Maybe it's time to start making your own decisions. Sophie falls into step beside me as we leave. That was intense. You okay? I look back at the hospital room, where Vivian sits alone, her empire crumbling despite her desperate grab for control. The victory tastes different than I expected. Not sweet, not bitter, just empty. No, I answer honestly. But I will be. My phone buzzes again, another news alert about the scandal. I switch it off without reading it. Some victories don't need an audience. The charity gala feels like walking into a beautifully decorated trap. Crystal chandeliers throw fractured light across faces I've known for years. Clients, competitors, friends who've chosen sides in the wake of the Davidson scandal. Their whispers follow me like perfumed shadows. Quite brave of her to show up. Did you hear about Vivian's condition? I heard she orchestrated the whole thing. Sophie squeezes my arm. We can still leave. No. I straighten my spine, gripping my champagne flute like a shield. This is exactly where I need to be. Across the room, Mark stands with a group of investors, his usual confidence replaced by something more brittle. He catches my eye, then quickly looks away. The gesture feels like a preview of what's to come. Clara! Thomas Chen materializes beside me. A word? We move to a quieter corner, where the orchestra's music provides cover for conversation. His expression is grave. The Davidson Group is retracting their statement. The champagne turns sour in my mouth. They can't. We had a deal. They found better terms elsewhere. He glances meaningfully across the room, to where Vivian has just entered, looking remarkably recovered. She's speaking with Robert Davidson himself, their heads close together. That's impossible. The evidence has been re-examined. Thomas's voice is carefully neutral. New experts suggest different interpretations. My hands are tied. The room suddenly feels too warm, too crowded. When? The announcement goes out tomorrow morning. Clara. He hesitates. You might want to prepare for... Clara? Vivian's voice cuts through the murmur of conversation. She's walking toward us, Robert Davidson in tow. I'm so glad you came. We have something to discuss. The crowd parts around them like water. I feel dozens of eyes watching, waiting for the drama to unfold. This is what Vivian does best, turns private wars into public spectacles. I'm not interested in... Oh, but you should be. Her smile is razor sharp. Robert has just shared some fascinating insights about certain manipulated documents. Apparently, someone went to great lengths to create a very specific narrative. My heart pounds. The environmental reports, were perfectly accurate. Robert Davidson steps forward. The altered versions, however, seem to have originated from an interesting source, your design firm's servers, to be precise. The champagne flute slips from my fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The crash draws every eye in the room. That's not possible. But even as I say it, I remember giving Thomas's team access to my systems, trusting them to handle the technical details. You set me up. Vivian's smile widens. I told you once that you weren't strong enough for this family. I should have been more specific. You're not smart enough either. Mark appears at her side, looking sick. Mother, please. Not now, dear. She turns to the gathering crowd. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. As you may have heard, I've had some health challenges recently, but they've helped me realize what truly matters: family, loyalty, and truth. The word truth falls like a hammer. Several phones are out now, recording. Tomorrow's headlines writing themselves in real time. Clara thought she could destroy what I've built. Vivian's voice carries perfectly. Instead, she's demonstrated exactly why I was right about her all along. Amateur moves have amateur consequences. I look for Sophie, but she's been pushed to the edge of the crowd. Thomas Chen has vanished completely. The trap closes with elegant precision. Security will escort you out. Vivian's final twist of the knife. And Clara, expect to hear from our lawyers. Fraud charges are just the beginning. As two suited men approach, I catch a last glimpse of Mark's face. There's something there. Regret? Pity? But he doesn't move to help. Some patterns never change. Outside, the night air hits like a slap. Sophie rushes out behind me. Clara, wait! We can fix this! There must be something! Don't you see? My laugh sounds hysterical even to my own ears. She planned this from the moment I found those surveillance photos. Everything, the hospital, the Davidson statement, Thomas Chen, it was all part of her game. What are you going to do? I stare up at the gala's glittering windows, where life continues as if my world hasn't just imploded. Somewhere up there, Vivian is savoring her victory, probably already planning her next move. The only thing I can do. My voice steadies. Learn to play better. The flash drive feels impossibly heavy in my hand as I stand outside Vivian's office. Through the glass walls, I can see her at her desk, orchestrating her empire's recovery with practiced ease. The fraud charges against me are still pending, but she's already moved on to new victories. She looks up as I enter, her smile sharp as broken glass. Clara, security didn't mention you had an appointment. They're busy dealing with the press downstairs. I close the door behind me. Something about anonymous tips regarding offshore accounts and falsified insurance claims. The smile freezes. More desperate accusations? Haven't you learned? Actually, I learned exactly what you taught me. I placed the flash drive on her desk. About keeping receipts, about having insurance. She doesn't touch it. What is this? Everything. Your real financial records. The bribes to building inspectors. The money laundering through shell companies. I tap the drive. Even that interesting transfer to Thomas Chen's private account right before the gala. You're bluffing. Mark helped me find it. That lands. For the first time, real fear flickers across her face. Mark would never... Check your phone. She does, and I watch the color drain from her face as she reads whatever message Mark has just sent. When she looks up, her composure is cracked. What do you want? Funny. That's exactly what you asked me in the hospital. I sit down, uninvited. But I'm not here to negotiate. Then why? Because I want you to understand something. I lean forward. You didn't lose because I outsmarted you. You lost because you taught Mark the same lessons you taught me, about survival, about loyalty, about always having an escape plan. Her hand trembles slightly as she reaches for her phone again. I can still destroy you. One call. To who? The Davidson Group? I pull out my own phone, showing her the email chain. They're already distancing themselves. Seems their board doesn't appreciate being used in personal vendettas. Bad for business. A commotion rises from the lobby below. Through the glass walls, we can see reporters gathering, cameras ready. They're here for the press conference, I tell her. The one where Mark explains how his mother's company has been operating for the past decade. Unless what? Her voice is barely a whisper. Unless you sign everything over to him. Today. Let him run the company his way without your guidance. She laughs, but it sounds hollow. You think this will fix anything? That Mark will suddenly become his own man? No, but it gives him a chance. I stand. Which is more than you ever gave either of us. The elevator dings. Mark steps out, flanked by board members and lawyers. Through the glass, our eyes meet. He looks different, stronger maybe, or just free. You've destroyed my family, Vivian says quietly. No, you did that yourself. I just showed Mark the evidence. She stares at the flash drive for a long moment. Below, the crowd of reporters grows. Her empire teeters on the edge of exposure, ready to crumble. He's my son, and he deserves better than what you've given him. I move toward the door. You have 10 minutes to decide. After that, Mark starts talking. You really think you've won? She calls after me. That this makes you better than me? I pause, hand on the doorknob. No, it makes me exactly like you. That's what scares you most, isn't it? The look on her face tells me I'm right. As I walk away, I hear her calling for her lawyers. Through the glass, I watch her pick up the flash drive with trembling fingers. Mark meets me at the elevator. Did she? Give her a minute. I press the lobby button. She taught us both about power, Mark. Now she gets to learn about losing it. He nods slowly. What happens after? That's up to you. The elevator starts descending. But whatever you decide, make sure it's actually your decision. As we reach the lobby, my phone buzzes. A message from Vivian's lawyer. She's ready to sign. You know, Mark says quietly, she'll never forgive either of us for this. I watch the numbers count down, floor by floor. Some victories aren't about forgiveness. The elevator doors open to camera flashes and shouted questions. Mark straightens his tie, ready to face them, ready to start over. I step back, letting him take the lead. Some battles you win by walking away. The moving boxes in Vivian's office look wrong somehow. Too ordinary for the end of an empire. She's taking down her awards when I arrive, each acrylic testament to her success carefully wrapped in newspaper. Come to gloat? She doesn't turn around. No. I set a folder on her desk. To return these. She glances at the surveillance photos spilling out. Keep them as a souvenir. I don't need souvenirs. I watch her hands shake slightly as she wraps another award. The company announcement went out this morning. Mark's doing well. He's gutting everything I built. Finally, she faces me. The past month has aged her decade. Was that your idea or his? You really still don't understand, do you? I pick up one of her photos. Her and Mark at some charity event, both smiling perfectly. He's not destroying your legacy, he's fixing it. Her laugh is bitter. By exposing our methods, canceling profitable contracts, that's not fixing, that's surrender. That's integrity. I set the photo down. Something you taught him to fake so well, he finally wanted the real thing. A knock interrupts us. Mark stands in the doorway, looking uncertain. These days, he always looks uncertain when his mother's involved, like he's still learning to trust his own judgment. The board meeting's starting, he tells her. They're waiting for your formal resignation. Vivian straightens her jacket. Armor for one last battle. I suppose you'll both enjoy watching this. Actually, I'm leaving. I move toward the door. This part isn't about me. Mark catches my arm as I pass. Clara, wait. I never thanked you. Don't. I gently pull away. Just do better, both with the company and... I glance at Vivian, still proud even in defeat, with family. Hey, is that what we are now? Vivian's voice stops me. Family? No, but maybe someday Mark can have one that doesn't run on fear. Outside, Sophie waits by her car. She's been my constant through all this, watching me become someone she probably doesn't fully recognize anymore. "Ready for your meeting?" she asks. I nod. My new design firm launches next week. Bigger projects, bigger clients, built on reputation rather than revenge. It feels strange, starting over. Good strange? I look back at the building where I first learned about power, both wielding it and surviving it. Through the windows, I can see Mark leading Vivian toward the boardroom, their shadows stretching long against the glass. Just strange. I get into the car. "Did you know Vivian called me yesterday? Said she's finally proud of me, that I proved her right about what it takes to succeed in this world." Sophie starts the engine. "Did you tell her where to stick her pride?" "No." I watch the building shrink in the side mirror. Because part of me thinks she's right. I became exactly what she always wanted Mark to be, someone willing to burn everything down to win. "You're nothing like her." "Aren't I?" I used her own tactics against her. Played her game, just better. I turn away from the mirror. The difference is, I chose to walk away after winning. She never could. Sophie navigates through traffic in silence for a moment. "So what now?" "Now?" I pull out my phone, where an email from Mark waits unread. Probably about the company transition, or maybe something more personal. I leave it unopened. Now I figure out who I am without revenge driving every decision. And if Vivian tries something else, I think about the final piece of leverage I still have. Evidence I never showed Mark. Proof of crimes that would destroy what's left of his relationship with his mother. It sits in a safe deposit box, my own insurance policy, my own piece of Vivian's legacy. Then I'll remember what winning really cost. I switch off my phone. Some victories feel like losses when you look at them right. Sophie pulls up to my new office building. The sign company is just finishing installing my company's logo. Clean, modern, nothing like the Harrison aesthetic. You know what the weird part is? I gather my things. I think Vivian finally respects me. Not for beating her, but for knowing when to stop. Is that enough? I step out into the morning sun, looking up at my name against the clear sky. It has to be. Otherwise, I'm just another version of her, waiting to self-destruct. The door closes behind me with a soft click, final as a period at the end of a very long sentence.
The smell of fresh coffee couldn't mask the stench of their betrayal. I stood frozen in my own kitchen doorway, watching my husband Mark and his family hunched over blueprints spread across our dining table. They hadn't noticed me yet, too absorbed in their grand plans for my father's land. The parking structure could easily fit 300 spaces, Travis said, jabbing his finger at the paper. Conservative estimate puts revenue at 6 figures annually. My father wasn't even cold in his grave. Lydia will come around. My mother-in-law Patricia's voice dripped with false sweetness. Once she sees how much sense it makes financially. I gripped my car keys until they bit into my palm. Mark nodded along with them, like the puppet he'd always been. 12 years of marriage, and I'd never seen him so clearly as I did in that moment. The environmental survey might be an issue, Mark said, running his hand through his hair. His tell when he's nervous. Harold was particular about preservation. Your father-in-law is dead, Mark. Patricia's words cut through the air. It's time to think about the living. The living, like vultures circling a carcass. I let my keys drop onto the counter with a clatter. 3 heads snapped up in perfect synchronization. If I wasn't so angry, I might have laughed. Lydia! Mark straightened, trying to gather the papers. You're home early. Clearly. I walked to the table, each step measured. Don't stop on my account. I'm fascinated by how you're planning to carve up my inheritance. Travis had the decency to look uncomfortable. Patricia didn't bother hiding her ambition behind a mask of shame. We were going to discuss this with you, dear. Over dinner tonight. How thoughtful. I picked up one of the drawings. Neat lines and numbers replaced the wildflowers and oak trees my father had protected for decades. And when exactly did you start planning this? Before or after the funeral? Now, Lydia. Mark stepped toward me, hands raised like he was approaching a wild animal. This could be good for everyone. Your father's land has been sitting unused. Unused? The word tasted like poison. That land is home to 3 endangered species. Dad spent his life protecting it. But I suppose you knew that when you married me, didn't you, Mark? Playing the long game? Patricia's perfectly lined lips thinned. Don't be dramatic. We're trying to help you make sensible decisions during a difficult time. I looked at each of them in turn. My brother-in-law with his desperate ambition, my mother-in-law with her calculating eyes, and my husband with his weak excuses. The betrayal settled into my bones like ice. Get out. My voice was steady, surprising even me. All of you. Lydia. Mark started. I said get out. I slammed my hand on the table, sending coffee cups rattling. And take your vulture convention with you. They gathered their papers in tense silence. Patricia paused at the door, her designer purse clutched like a shield. You're being unreasonable. Think about Mark's position in the family. I smiled, and it felt like breaking glass. Oh, I am thinking about positions, Patricia. More than you know. After they left, I stood in my empty kitchen, my father's voice echoing in my memory. Sometimes, Butterfly, the people closest to us cast the longest shadows. I pulled out my phone and dialed my father's lawyer. Mr. Phillips, it's Lydia Bennett. We need to talk about my father's will. Immediately. The game they wanted to play? Fine. But they'd forgotten one crucial detail. I was Harold Thompson's daughter, and he taught me more than just how to preserve wildflowers. Mr. Phillips's office hadn't changed in 20 years. Same leather chairs, same dusty law books, same faint smell of pipe tobacco, though he'd quit long before I was born. The familiarity should have been comforting. It wasn't. Your father was very specific about the land's future, he said, sliding a thick manila envelope across his desk. The will is ironclad. I traced my finger along the envelope's edge. They'll fight it. The Bennetts? He removed his reading glasses, polishing them with deliberate care. They already have. Patricia called this morning, suggesting your father wasn't of sound mind when he made his final arrangements. The rage I'd been containing since yesterday sparked again. Of course she did. She also mentioned your emotional state, suggested you might need help managing the inheritance. I barked out a laugh that held no humor. Let me guess, she volunteered? Along with Travis as co-executor. He replaced his glasses, fixing me with a steady gaze. Your father anticipated this, Lydia. Open the envelope. Inside was a stack of documents, but what caught my eye was a handwritten letter in Dad's familiar scrawl. My throat tightened as I unfolded it. The office door opened before I could read it. Mark stood there, looking uncomfortable in his pressed suit and tie. Sorry I'm late. You weren't invited. The words came out sharper than I intended. Or maybe exactly as sharp as I intended. I'm still your husband. He closed the door, taking the seat beside me. We need to discuss this as a family. Like you discussed the parking lot plans with me? Mr. Phillips cleared his throat. Perhaps I should give you two a moment. No. I straightened in my chair. Mark can hear this with everyone else at the official reading. Unless he'd like to explain why his signature is on development proposals dated 3 months ago? Mark's face paled. How did you... Your brother talks too much when he's excited. I turned back to the lawyer. When can we schedule the reading? Thursday at 2. I'll notify all parties. He hesitated. Lydia, your father also left something in the safe. For your eyes only. Mark shifted beside me. As her husband? For her eyes only, Mr. Phillips repeated firmly, standing to enter the combination on a wall safe I'd never noticed before. He retrieved a small wooden box, weathered and familiar. Dad's treasure box, he'd called it. The sight of it knocked the wind from my lungs. I'll need a moment, I managed to say. Mark touched my arm. Lydia. I jerked away. Alone. After they left, I opened the box with trembling hands. Inside lay a stack of photographs. The land through the seasons, wildflowers in bloom, deer at dawn. Beneath them, a USB drive and another letter. My butterfly. If you're reading this, they've already shown their cards. The drive contains everything you need. Proof of Patricia's gambling debts, Travis's failed ventures, the money they've borrowed against properties they don't own. Your mother always said I was too trusting. I wasn't. I was waiting. Remember what I taught you about chess? Sometimes you have to sacrifice a piece to win the game. All my love, Dad. I pressed the letter to my chest, a laugh bubbling up that might have been a sob. Even from the grave, he was protecting me. Protected me by arming me with exactly what I needed. When I emerged from the office, Mark was pacing the hallway. We need to talk about this. No. I walked past him, clutching the box. We needed to talk 3 months ago when you first signed those papers. We needed to talk last week when your mother started calling real estate developers. We needed to talk yesterday, before I found you all plotting over my father's legacy like vultures. It's not like that. It's exactly like that. I stopped at the elevator, finally meeting his eyes. You know what the worst part is, Mark? Dad saw it coming. He knew what your family would do, probably before I even married you. And he made sure I'd be ready. The elevator doors opened. As I stepped in, I saw Mark's reflection in the polished metal. Lost, confused, and for the first time afraid. Good. He should be. Because this wasn't just about protecting the land anymore. This was about justice. And I was just getting started. Patricia's dining room felt like a stage set. Everything arranged for maximum dramatic effect. Crystal glasses caught the chandelier light, white linen napkins folded into perfect triangles. A performance of family unity, directed by the matriarch herself. I pushed my untouched salmon around the plate, listening to Travis hold court at the head of the table. The investors are practically begging to get in on this, he said, gesturing with his wine glass. We're talking serious money here, life-changing money. How fascinating. I speared a piece of asparagus. And how many investors have actually signed on? Travis's smile flickered. Well, we're in preliminary discussions, which means none. I set down my fork. Just like your tech startup last year. Or was it the cryptocurrency venture? Patricia cleared her throat. Lydia, dear, this negativity isn't helpful. We're trying to have a nice family dinner. Are we? I looked around the table. Because it sounds like another sales pitch for destroying my father's legacy. Mark's hand found my knee under the table. A warning squeeze. I shrugged it off. Your father would have wanted you to be practical, Patricia said, dabbing her lips with her napkin. The property taxes alone will be covered by the trust he set up. I smiled thinly. But you knew that already, didn't you? Since you've been calling his accountant. The silence that followed was delicious. Patricia's face tightened like she'd bitten into something sour. Mark, she said finally, perhaps you should explain to your wife about family loyalty. Don't. The word came out like a whip crack. Don't you dare use him as your puppet again. Lydia. Mark started. No, let's talk about family loyalty. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the files I'd found on Dad's USB drive. Like the loyalty that made you cover Patricia's gambling debts 3 times in the last 5 years? Or the loyalty that had you sign personal guarantees for Travis's failed ventures? Travis's face went red. That's private family business. It became my business when you decided to steal my inheritance to fix your mistakes. I turned to Mark. Did you know about the second mortgage on our house? The one your mother convinced you to sign for last month? Mark's confusion wasn't feigned. What second mortgage? Show him the papers, Patricia. When she didn't move, I pulled out copies and slid them across the table. Your signature's a decent forgery, honey, but not perfect. The color drained from Mark's face as he read. Patricia set down her wine glass with a sharp click. Everything I've done has been for this family, she said. Sometimes difficult decisions. Save it. I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood. The will reading is Thursday. I suggest you all be there, especially you, Mark. You'll want to hear exactly what my father knew about your family's difficult decisions. Sit down, Patricia snapped. We're not finished. Oh, but we are. I dropped my napkin onto my plate. By the way, those investors Travis mentioned? They pulled out this morning. Seems someone sent them proof of his previous bankruptcies. Anonymous source, of course. Travis knocked over his wine glass, red spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. You vindictive bit. Travis! Patricia's voice could have frozen hell. I was already walking away when Mark caught up to me in the foyer. Lydia, wait. Please, we can talk about this. I turned to face him. Really looked at him. This man I'd loved for 12 years, who'd let his family poison everything we'd built. You know what hurts the most? My voice was steady, even as tears threatened. Dad tried to warn me about them years ago, but I defended you. Told him you were different, that you'd choose me when it mattered. I opened the front door. Guess we were both wrong. Where are you going? Home, to pack. I didn't look back. You can stay here with your real family. The papers will be ready to sign on Thursday. The door closed behind me with a final sounding click. In my car, I pulled out Dad's letter again, running my fingers over his familiar handwriting. Remember, Butterfly? Sometimes the biggest betrayals come wrapped in the prettiest packages. I started the engine, Patricia's perfectly arranged dinner party falling away in my rearview mirror. Dad had given me everything I needed to bring them down. Now it was time to use it. The key stuck in the lock of Dad's front door. It always had. One firm bump with my hip, and I was inside the empty house, surrounded by echoes of his life. Family photos on the walls, his reading glasses still on the side table, the scent of pipe tobacco that never quite faded. I'd been avoiding this place since the funeral. Now I had no choice. My phone buzzed. Another message from Mark. 14 since last night's dinner disaster. I silenced it without reading. The study was exactly as Dad left it. Organized chaos that only he understood. I started with the filing cabinet, searching for anything that might help me understand the extent of the Bennett schemes. Third drawer down, I found it. A folder labeled Patricia. You shouldn't be here. I spun around. Mark stood in the doorway, still in his work clothes. He must have followed me. Neither should you. I clutched the folder tighter. How did you get in? I still have the spare key, from when we used to check on him. He stepped into the room, eyes landing on the folder. What are you looking for? The truth. For once. I opened the folder, spreading documents across Dad's desk. Like why your mother's been making monthly payments to someone named James Carlton for the past year. Mark's face changed. Just slightly, but enough. You don't want to go down this road. Why? Because I might find out what really happened to the environmental survey? The one that mysteriously changed its findings right after these payments started? He reached for the papers. I pulled them back. Don't. My voice cracked. Don't make this worse. I'm trying to protect you. Protect me? I laughed, the sound harsh in the quiet room. By helping them steal everything my father worked for? You don't understand. Then make me understand. I slammed my hand on the desk. Tell me why you're choosing them over me. Over us. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, Mark sank into Dad's leather chair, suddenly looking old. They're broke, he said quietly. All of them. Mom's gambling debts, Travis's failed businesses. They're about to lose everything. This land, it's their last chance. And that justifies fraud? No, but... He ran a hand through his hair. Mom said it would be clean. Just a simple development deal. Nobody getting hurt. I pulled out another document from the folder. Tell that to James Carlton, the environmental inspector your mother's been bribing. He was Dad's friend. 20 years on the preservation board together. Mark's head snapped up. What? Dad knew Mark. He knew everything. I spread out more papers, bank statements, emails, photographs. He documented all of it. Every bribe, every forged document, every backroom deal. He was building a case. Against my family? Against anyone who tried to destroy his life's work. I touched a photo of Dad and me on his desk, taken on the land we were fighting over. including his own daughter's husband, apparently. Mark stood, reaching for me. Lydia. The front door slammed. Heavy footsteps in the hallway. In here, Mark called out before I could stop him. Travis appeared in the doorway, followed by Patricia. Their presence felt like a violation. Well, Patricia said, eyeing the scattered documents. I see we're all having a family meeting. Get out. My voice was ice. All of you. We can't do that, dear. Patricia's smile didn't reach her eyes. Not when you're clearly planning to cause trouble with private family matters. Private? I held up the Carlton file. Should we ask the ethics board how private this is? Travis stepped forward, but Patricia raised a hand to stop him. Think carefully about your next move, Lydia. Family loyalty works both ways. It would be a shame if Mark had to choose sides. I looked at my husband, waiting for him to defend me. He stared at the floor. He already has. I gathered the documents, my hands steady despite everything. Thursday's will reading just got more interesting. As I walked out, I heard Patricia say something about damage control. But it was Mark's silence that followed me, heavy as a funeral bell. Dad's final letter burned in my pocket. Remember, Butterfly, when you're ready to strike, make sure you have all your weapons ready. I did now. And Thursday couldn't come soon enough. The construction equipment arrived at dawn. I watched from my car as yellow machines crawled across Dad's land like insects, their diesel engines shattering the morning quiet. Travis stood among them, gesturing with a rolled-up set of plans, playing developer. My phone lit up. Mark again. Please come home. We can fix this. I turned off the phone and pulled out the USB drive. One file remained unopened, a video dated 3 days before Dad died. My hands shook as I connected it to my laptop. Dad's face filled the screen, gaunt but determined. Butterfly, if you're watching this, they've started moving equipment onto the land. Patricia always was impatient. He coughed, then continued. There's something I never told you about the trust. Something that changes everything. A tap on my window made me jump. James Carlton stood there, the corrupted environmental inspector, looking nothing like his confident photos in Dad's files. I got out, keeping the car between us. Brave of you to show your face. I needed to warn you. He glanced nervously at the construction site. Patricia Bennett, she's not just planning a parking lot. The environmental survey I falsified? It wasn't about the endangered species, it was about what's under the land. What are you talking about? Mineral rights. Your father discovered a car door slammed nearby. Carlton flinched and backed away. Just check the geological surveys from 1985, before they disappear too. He hurried off as Patricia's Mercedes pulled up. She emerged looking immaculate as always, but something was different. An edge of desperation in her eyes. Lovely morning for a chat with disgraced officials, isn't it? She joined me at the fence line. Though I suppose James has nothing left to lose now. Unlike some of us. What's under the land, Patricia? She didn't flinch. Progress, opportunity, a future for this family if you'd just stop fighting us. It's not your family's future to take. No? She turned to face me fully. Tell me, dear, how do you think your father afforded to maintain this property all these years? Those conservation grants barely covered taxes. The implication hit like a physical blow. You're lying. Am I? Ask yourself why he never developed this land, despite numerous offers. Why he was so obsessed with keeping people off it. She smiled thinly. Your father had secrets too, Lydia. Dark ones. The kind that destroy legacies. Get out. My voice shook with rage. Get your equipment and get out or I'll... You'll what? Expose us all? She laughed softly. Oh, my dear. You really should watch that video to the end. She walked away, leaving me with the laptop screen still frozen on Dad's face. Behind me, the machines continued their invasion, tearing into the earth like wounds. I forced myself to press play again. The trust has a condition, Dad continued on screen. One I never told anyone. If the land is developed within 20 years of my death, everything goes to the Bennett family. I had to make sure. He started coughing again, harder this time. The video ended there. My phone buzzed again. A text from Mark. Mom told me about the trust condition. I'm so sorry. Please let me explain. The machines growled louder. Travis was directing them toward the old oak grove, Dad's favorite spot. Each bite of their metal teeth felt like they were tearing into me instead of the earth. I opened Dad's final letter again, searching for guidance, for any hint he'd prepared me for this. The words blurred through my tears. Sometimes the biggest betrayals come wrapped in the prettiest packages. But which betrayal? Patricia's schemes? Mark's weakness? Or something darker, buried in the land itself? The oak trees started falling, their ancient trunks crashing to earth like thunder. And with them fell my last illusions about simple revenge or justice. This wasn't just about saving Dad's legacy anymore. This was about uncovering the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. I started the car. I had until tomorrow's will reading to find those 1985 surveys. To understand what Dad had really been protecting or hiding all these years. The machines kept eating the earth behind me, hungry for whatever secrets lay beneath. The 1985 geological survey lay on Mr. Phillips' conference table like a bomb waiting to detonate. Around it sat the Bennett family. Patricia perfectly poised, Travis fidgeting, Mark pale and drawn. The will reading would start in 10 minutes. Rare earth elements, I said, breaking the silence. That's what's under the land. That's what this has all been about. Patricia didn't blink. Your father knew. All those years preaching conservation, he was sitting on a fortune. And you knew too. That's why you pushed Mark to marry me. The words tasted like ash. A decade-long con. Marriage of convenience. Travis smirked. Welcome to the family business. Mark stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. I never knew. Sit down, Mark. Patricia's voice could have frozen hell. You've done enough damage. I spread out more documents across the table. Dad's trust condition wasn't about protecting the land. It was about exposing you. All of you. I turned to Mark. Including my loving husband. Lydia, please. The trust transfers everything to the Bennetts if development starts within 20 years, I continued. But it also triggers an automatic audit of everything, including those shell companies you've been using to hide Patricia's gambling debts. Travis's smirk vanished. Patricia's mask cracked, just slightly. You really think you can threaten us? She reached into her bag, pulled out a folder. Your father's hands weren't clean either. These documents prove he knew about the minerals for years. Took payments to keep quiet. More forgeries? Ask James Carlton. Oh wait, you can't. He had an unfortunate accident this morning. Car brake failure. The room tilted. Carlton's warning cut short. Another piece of Dad's legacy, erased. Mr. Phillips entered, carrying the official will documents. Before he could speak, the conference room door burst open. 2 federal agents stepped in, badges out. Patricia Bennett? Travis Bennett? You're under investigation for fraud, conspiracy, and in connection with the death of James Carlton. What? Travis jumped up. Lydia, what did you do? I hadn't done anything. This wasn't part of my plan. Patricia stood slowly, smoothing her skirt. Well played, Harold, she murmured. Then louder, I invoke my right to counsel. As the agents read their rights, Mark grabbed my arm. Tell me you didn't know about Carlton. I pulled away. Like you didn't know about the mineral rights? I loved you, he whispered. That part was real. Was it? Or was that just another pretty package hiding a betrayal? The agents led Patricia and Travis out. Mark followed, pausing at the door. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Me too. I watched him go, feeling nothing but hollow. Mr. Phillips cleared his throat. There's one more document. Your father left strict instructions to be opened only after everything else came to light. He handed me a sealed envelope, Inside was a single sheet of paper, Dad's handwriting shaky but clear. My butterfly, by now you know the truth. About the land, about the Bennetts, about me. The minerals were my curse, my secret shame. I took their money, convinced myself it was for the greater good. But the guilt ate at me until I couldn't bear it. I'm sorry for putting you through this. Sorry for not trusting you with the truth sooner. The trust condition wasn't just about exposing them. It was about forcing me to face my own sins. The land is yours now. Truly yours, free of all our shadows. Plant something beautiful where we buried our secrets. All my love, Dad. The paper blurred. All my carefully planned revenge, my righteous anger, and in the end, there were no heroes. Just broken people, buried secrets, and a piece of land that had poisoned us all. Outside the window, I could see the construction equipment, still waiting to tear up the earth, to expose everything we'd tried to hide. The question was, what would grow from the ashes of all we'd destroyed? The construction site looked like an open wound in the morning light. Yellow machines stood frozen, their work halted by federal tape and uniformed officers. I walked past them, Dad's final letter burning in my pocket, toward the gathering crowd. Patricia stood with her lawyer, still elegant despite everything. Travis paced nearby, shooting venomous glances at Mark, who stood apart from them all. Mrs. Bennett. Dr. Chen from the Environmental Protection Agency stepped forward. We're ready to begin the inspection. Patricia's lawyer intervened. My client maintains all proper procedures were followed. Like James Carlton's proper procedures? I pulled out my phone, played the recording Carlton had secretly made the day before his death. Patricia's voice filled the air, discussing payoffs and cover-ups. That's inadmissible, the lawyer started. In court, maybe. I nodded toward the EPA team. But they can still inspect every inch of this land, every sample, every test Carlton falsified. Unless what? Travis snapped. I pulled out another document. Sign over your development rights. All of them. The land goes into a conservation trust. Permanently. Or what? Patricia's mask finally cracked. You'll destroy us? Like your father tried to? No. I moved closer, voice low. I'll let you destroy yourselves. The federal investigation, the environmental violations, Carlton's death, it'll all come out. Every dirty secret, every betrayal. Is that what you want? You self-righteous little... Travis started forward, but Mark caught his arm. Enough. Mark's voice was steady. Sign it, Mom. Patricia turned on him, snake quick. After everything I've done for you? You mean to me. He moved to stand beside me. Sign it, or I'll testify about everything, including what really happened to Carlton. The silence stretched tight as a wire. Then Patricia laughed, a hollow, broken sound. You really are Harold's daughter. She snatched the document, scrawled her signature. There, you've won. Happy? This was never about winning. I handed the paper to Dr. Chen. It was about truth, all of it. As if on cue, the EPA team began their work, marking areas for testing. Patricia's lawyer led her away, already discussing damage control. Travis followed, defeated. Mark stayed. I knew, he said quietly. Not everything. Not at first, but I knew enough. Should have chosen you sooner. Why didn't you? Same reason your father kept his secrets. Sometimes the truth feels more dangerous than lies. I touched the earth, feeling its warmth. Somewhere beneath us lay the minerals that had poisoned so many lives. But above them... Help me with something? I pulled a seedling from my bag, an oak sapling from Dad's greenhouse. Mark watched as I began digging. Your father's favorite, he said softly. He left instructions. Plant something beautiful where we buried our secrets. I placed the seedling in the hole. Want to help? Together, we covered its roots with soil. Behind us, the EPA teams worked, uncovering truth after buried truth. But here, in this small patch of earth, we were planting something new. What happens now? Mark asked. I watched the sapling sway in the breeze. The land goes into trust. The investigation continues, and we learn to grow something honest from all these lies. I stood, dusting off my hands. It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is. He echoed Dad's favorite phrase, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something like hope. The morning sun caught the sapling's leaves, making them glow like emeralds. Somewhere, I thought I could hear Dad laughing. Not at our pain or our mistakes, but at the simple truth we'd all forgotten. That even poisoned earth can nurture new life if you're brave enough to plant it. I took Mark's hand, and together we walked away from the machines, the investigators, and all our buried secrets. Behind us, the little oak tree reached for the sky, its roots already growing deep into the earth we'd fought so hard to save. The oak sapling had grown 3 inches when Patricia's sentencing came down. I sat in the courtroom's back row, watching her maintain perfect posture as the judge detailed her crimes. Travis had already taken his plea deal, turning state's evidence against their other conspirators. Mark squeezed my hand as his mother was led away. Neither of us spoke. Some wounds needed silence to heal. Outside, autumn painted the courthouse steps in gold and red. A reporter approached, notebook ready, but Mark stepped between us. No comment. Mrs. Bennett? She persisted. Any response to the EPA's findings about the rare earth deposits? I paused. Plant a tree. See what grows. We left her puzzling over that, walking to where Mr. Phillips waited with the final paperwork. The land transfer to the Conservation Trust would be complete by sunset. Your father would be proud, he said, holding out his pen. Would he? I thought of his final confession, the guilt he'd carried, the secrets he'd buried beneath all that protected land, but also the legacy he'd left. Not just the earth itself, but the truth he'd forced us all to face. One last thing. Mr. Phillips produced a small package. Found this while clearing your father's office. It was marked for after the truth comes out. Inside lay a single butterfly chrysalis in a small glass case and a note. My butterfly. By the time you read this, you'll understand why I named you that. Not for your beauty or delicacy, but for your capacity to transform. To emerge stronger from whatever cocoon life wraps you in. The land was my chrysalis, my shell of secrets and shame. But you've broken free of it. Made something better from my mistakes. The minerals will stay buried. Let them. Some treasures are worth more underground, feeding roots that reach for the sky. All my love, Dad. I handed the note to Mark. He read it silently, then looked at the chrysalis. It's still alive. It's waiting. I signed the trust documents, feeling something settle in my chest. Like we all were. The drive to the land took us past Patricia's empty house, its windows dark. Travis's car was gone from the driveway, probably sold to pay legal fees. The family that had schemed for so long to possess everything was left with nothing but consequences. But revenge tasted different than I'd expected. Not sweet, not bitter, just real, like fresh earth after rain. We parked by the oak sapling. Other seedlings had joined it now, planted by local conservation volunteers. The construction equipment scars were healing, covered by new growth. I've been thinking, Mark said, touching a leaf, about what your father wrote, about transforming. And maybe we all were chrysalises, Mom, Travis, me, all wrapped up in lies we thought would protect us. He looked at me, but only some of us chose to break free. I took out the glass case, studying the chrysalis inside. Its dark shell had begun to turn transparent, revealing hints of wing patterns beneath. We should release it here, I said, when it's ready. How will we know when? I thought of Dad's words about truth and transformation, about secrets buried and revelations unearthed, about the choice between staying wrapped in comfortable lies or fighting free into uncertain light. We'll know. I placed the case gently between the saplings. Some things have to happen in their own time. Mark's hand found mine again. Behind us, the sun painted long shadows across the land. Not the darkness of secrets anymore, but the simple shade of growing things reaching toward light. The chrysalis waited, Neither past nor future, but perfectly present. Like the minerals beneath our feet. Like the truth we'd fought so hard to uncover. Like the love that had survived betrayal's bitter season. Some transformations couldn't be rushed. Some revenges looked like redemption in the end. I leaned against Mark, feeling the wind move through the young trees. Dad's voice whispered in their leaves. Plant something beautiful where we buried our secrets. We had, and now we would watch it grow.
This story is titled, She Cheated with My Best Friend and My Business Partner. So I played dumb and took my nuclear revenge and left them with nothing. Hey everyone! I spend so much time finding these stories for you. If you enjoy the content, please hit that subscribe button. It means the world and helps keep this journey going strong. Let's grow together. Now let's start the video. OP starts by saying, So, I 42 male, a self-made man who poured blood, sweat, and sleepless nights into building the life I always dreamed of. I've always been the guy with the plan. Every move I make is calculated, every risk measured. I've built my business, my family, and my reputation with my own two hands, and I took pride in being the guy who had it all together. My wife, Lisa, and I met 15 years ago. She was the kind of woman who could light up a room with her smile. She was charming, witty, and supportive. Or so I believed. When we married, I thought I hit the jackpot. Then there was John, my best friend since college. We were partners in crime, the dynamic duo. John was the guy I could count on to have my back, in business and in life. Together, John and I built a multi-million-dollar business. I handled the vision and the big deals, while he managed operations. We worked seamlessly together, and I trusted him like a brother. Life wasn't perfect, but it was damn close. But cracks started to appear. Lisa had been distant for months, giving vague excuses for late nights and sudden shopping sprees. I brushed it off at first. I mean, everyone has off days, right? Then, there was the time she came home wearing a diamond bracelet she claimed was on sale. Call it intuition, call it paranoia, but something about her story didn't sit right. Meanwhile, John started acting different. Meetings became less frequent, and his enthusiasm waned. He seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone during conversations. But I chalked it up to stress. Running a business is no walk in the park, and I figured he just needed some space. Still, there was this gnawing feeling in my gut that I couldn't ignore. My two most trusted people were acting off, and I couldn't shake the sense that something was happening behind my back. Then, it happened. One day, I was walking past Lisa's car in the driveway, and an idea struck me. A recorder. Not my proudest moment, but I needed answers. I slipped it under the driver's seat, fully expecting to find nothing more than harmless chatter. Boy, was I wrong. A few days later, I retrieved the recorder and pressed play. At first, it was just normal. Everyday conversations, calls with her sister, a chat with a friend about some new yoga class. But then I heard his voice. John. The two of them were talking. About me. Henry is so controlling, Lisa complained, her voice dripping with frustration. He acts like he's the king of the world, and I'm just supposed to be grateful to live in his kingdom. I get it, John replied. He doesn't listen, does he? He's always so focused on work, on being the best. It's like he doesn't even see you anymore. I know, right? Sometimes I wonder what it would have been like if I'd ended up with someone like you. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. My wife, and my best friend were talking about me like I was some clueless tyrant. And John, the man I trusted with my life, he was feeding into it, planting seeds of doubt. They didn't outright say they were having an affair, but the undertone was clear. There was something between them, something that had no place in my marriage or my friendship, and they thought I was too blind to notice. At that moment, something in me shifted. I wasn't just hurt, I was furious. These two people, the closest to me, were conspiring behind my back. They thought they could get away with it, but they underestimated me. Big mistake. Ikrasashna. Betrayal isn't a single moment. It's a slow burn that eats away at you. After hearing that recording, I sat in my home office, stunned. The betrayal from both Lisa and John hit me like a gut punch. I replayed the conversation a dozen times, dissecting every word. The more I listened, the more layers of their deceit became clear. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it's just harmless venting. Maybe John is just being a good friend. But deep down, I knew better. The way she spoke about me, the way John agreed so quickly, it wasn't innocent. It was calculated. For days, I carried this weight around like a lead vest. Every time I saw Lisa, it felt like a slap in the face. She'd kiss me goodbye in the morning, act like the doting wife, and all I could think about was how she had confided in John. The thought of John made my blood boil. This was the guy who had celebrated my biggest wins with me, stood next to me at my wedding, and now he was, what? Undermining me? Poaching my wife emotionally, or worse? I didn't confront them right away. I wasn't ready. Instead, I observed. And let me tell you, once you're suspicious, you start seeing things you didn't notice before. Lisa had developed a habit of leaving the house for vague reasons. Yoga, errands, meeting friends. I'd never questioned it before, but now every excuse felt like a lie. One evening, she came home late, claiming she'd been at a wine tasting with her sister. She smelled like perfume, not wine. My gut told me something wasn't right, but I kept my mouth shut. John started avoiding me. Meetings that used to last hours were suddenly cut short. He dodged phone calls and emails, claiming he was overwhelmed with work. The excuses were weak. This was the guy who used to thrive under pressure, the guy who could close a deal with his eyes closed. Now, he couldn't even look me in the eye. The breaking point came when Lisa mentioned a business trip John was taking. John said he's heading to Chicago next week for some big client meeting, she mentioned casually over dinner. My fork froze mid-air. John hadn't said a word about this trip to me. As his business partner, I should have been the first to know. That was the moment I knew something deeper was going on. The coincidences were stacking up, and I wasn't about to let them bury me under their lies. I decided it was time to act. I'm a meticulous guy. It's how I built my business. So, I approached this betrayal the same way I would tackle a hostile takeover, strategically. I started documenting everything. I combed through Lisa's credit card statements and found a series of charges that didn't add up. Hotel stays, high-end restaurants, spa treatments she never mentioned. Then, I turned my attention to John. I started paying closer attention to his work habits, or lack thereof. I noticed he was neglecting key accounts and failing to follow through on deals. It was as if he'd checked out entirely. I also began quietly asking around, reaching out to mutual friends and colleagues to gauge his behavior. The feedback was unanimous. Something was off with John. The pièce de resistance came when I managed to retrieve deleted messages from Lisa's phone. Don't ask me how. It wasn't exactly legal, but desperate times call for desperate measures. The text confirmed my worst fears. There were flirty messages from John, late-night exchanges filled with inside jokes, and even a reference to a special weekend they'd shared. I wanted to throw her phone across the room, but I kept my composure. If I confronted her now, I'd be acting on raw emotion. I needed a plan, a way to ensure that neither Lisa nor John could weasel out of this. I wasn't just going to confront them. I was going to dismantle their little charade piece by piece. One night, as Lisa slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I realized something crucial. This wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about power. Lisa and John thought they had the upper hand. They thought they could play me, use me, and keep me in the dark. But they underestimated me. They didn't see the storm brewing beneath the surface. I decided I wouldn't just confront them. I would destroy them. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming control of my life and making sure they could never pull something like this again. If there's one thing I've learned in business, it's that patience is key. When someone underestimates you, their guard drops. They make mistakes, and that's when you strike. Lisa and John thought they had me fooled, and I let them believe that for a little while longer. What they didn't know was that every move they made was feeding into my plan. I started with the business. John's position in the company was his pride and joy, and the foundation of his income. Lucky for me, when we started the company, I insisted on being the majority owner. John had never argued. After all, I was the one who took the initial financial risks. Now, that decision was about to pay off. I began quietly cutting him out. First, I started rerouting deals to myself and key team members I trusted. I reached out to clients directly, building stronger relationships and ensuring that John's involvement became irrelevant. Next, I initiated an audit, under the guise of streamlining operations, to uncover any discrepancies in the accounts John managed. I wasn't surprised to find a few questionable expenses. John's sloppy handling of finances gave me all the leverage I needed to legally terminate his partnership. But I wasn't going to pull the trigger just yet. Timing was everything, and I wanted him to feel secure before yanking the rug out from under him. Dealing with Lisa was trickier. I couldn't just confront her with the texts and recordings. I needed her to dig her own grave. So I started playing the role of the clueless, devoted husband. Romantic dinners, surprise gifts, even a weekend getaway. She ate it up, thinking I was just trying to patch up our rocky marriage. Little did she know, I was documenting everything. Her reactions, her excuses, and her lies. I also hired a private investigator. If Lisa was sneaking around, I wanted solid evidence. Sure enough, within a week, the PI handed me a folder filled with photos of Lisa meeting John at a boutique hotel. The timestamps matched the dates of her supposed wine nights. The PI also discovered something that infuriated me even more. John had been using company funds to book these rendezvous. They weren't just betraying me personally, they were stealing from the business I built. With every piece of evidence, I felt more in control. By the time I was done, I had everything I needed. Text messages between Lisa and John, loaded with flirtation and innuendos. Photos of their secret meetups, time-stamped and undeniable. Financial records showing John's misuse of company funds. A trail of Lisa's unexplained spending, which I knew would come in handy during the divorce. But I wasn't ready to confront them yet. I wanted them to feel safe, to think they'd gotten away with it. I played my part so well that Lisa even started being affectionate again. It made my skin crawl, but I kept my poker face. The perfect opportunity came when Lisa mentioned that John wanted to have dinner with us. He thinks we've been drifting apart, she said, her voice full of fake concern. He wants to make sure you're okay. I almost laughed out loud. The audacity of these two was almost impressive. I agreed to the dinner, knowing this would be the night I'd set the final trap. We met at a fancy restaurant, the kind of place where you have to make reservations weeks in advance. Lisa was glowing, dressed in a way that was clearly meant to impress John. He arrived late as usual, flashing his usual cocky grin. I played the gracious host, laughing at their jokes and toasting to friendship. What they didn't know was that I'd already tipped off the restaurant staff. Our table was wired with hidden cameras and microphones, capturing every word and gesture. As the wine flowed, they got comfortable. Too comfortable. Lisa leaned over to John at one point and whispered something I couldn't catch. But his smirk told me everything I needed to know. These two were still playing their little game, even with me sitting right there. That night, as Lisa slept beside me, I reviewed the footage. It wasn't as incriminating as the texts or the PI's photos, but it was enough to paint a picture of their betrayal. Combined with everything else, I had an airtight case. The next day, I met with my lawyer and laid out my plan. We drew up the divorce papers, outlining the terms of the prenup that would leave Lisa with next to nothing. We also began the process of removing John from the company, citing his financial misconduct. Everything was in place. All that was left was the confrontation. And trust me, I was ready to deliver the performance of a lifetime. The day of reckoning arrived, and I was ready. Every detail was planned, every piece of evidence meticulously laid out. This wasn't just about confronting Lisa and John, it was about making them realize the full weight of their betrayal. I wasn't just going to expose them, I was going to dismantle the comfortable lives they had built on the foundation of my trust. I invited John over under the pretense of a business meeting. Lisa was already home, lounging in the living room, completely unaware that the walls were closing in. John showed up dressed to impress, his confidence as irritating as ever. He greeted Lisa warmly, too warmly, and gave me a firm handshake, the kind meant to show camaraderie. "Big things happening, huh?" he said, grinning like the snake he was. "You could say that," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. The three of us sat down in the living room. Lisa poured wine for everyone, playing the role of the gracious hostess. John launched into some small talk about potential clients, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. I let him talk, nodding along as if I was interested, but inside, I was counting down the seconds until I could drop the hammer. "John," I said finally, cutting him off mid-sentence, "do you know why I asked you here today?" He blinked, caught off guard. To talk about the new contracts?" I leaned back in my chair, studying him. "I brought you here because I think it's time we had an honest conversation about business and about personal matters." Lisa shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting between us. "What's this about, Henry?" I ignored her, keeping my gaze fixed on John. "You've been lying to me, John. Both of you have." The color drained from his face. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, don't play dumb," I said, my voice cold. "You think I don't know about the two of you? The texts, the secret meetings, the hotel rooms? You've been betraying me, John, both as a business partner and as a friend." Lisa's wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. "Henry, wait! I can explain." "No!" I snapped, cutting her off. "You've done enough talking. Now it's my turn." I reached for the folder I had prepared, pulling out the first piece of evidence, the text messages. I tossed the printed screenshots onto the coffee table. "Recognize these, Lisa? John? These are your little late-night conversations. The ones where you talk about how controlling I am, how much better life would be without me." John's hands trembled as he reached for the papers. This isn't what it looks like." "Oh, it's exactly what it looks like," I interrupted. But if you need more proof, let me jog your memory. I pulled out the photos from the private investigator and threw them down. Lisa's face turned ghostly pale as she stared at the images of her and John entering the boutique hotel. This is insane, Lisa whispered. You've been spying on me? Spying? I laughed bitterly. No, Lisa. I was doing what any man would do when his wife and best friend stab him in the back. I gathered evidence. John tried to recover, his voice shaky. Henry, listen, I made a mistake. I didn't mean for it to go this far. This far? I said, standing now, towering over him. You didn't mean to sleep with my wife while using company money to fund your little escapades? Tell me, John, which part of this wasn't intentional? Before they could respond, I shifted gears. And speaking of company money, John, let's talk about the audit. His eyes widened in panic. What audit? The one that uncovered thousands of dollars in unauthorized expenses, I said, throwing another folder onto the table. Care to explain why the company credit card was used to pay for hotels, dinners, and spa treatments? I've already consulted with my lawyer. Your partnership is terminated, effective immediately. You can't do that, he protested, his voice rising. We built this company together. No, John, I said, my tone icy. I built this company. You were along for the ride. And now that ride is over. Finally, I turned to Lisa. And as for you, I've already filed for divorce. The prenup is ironclad, so don't expect to walk away with much. And given the evidence I've collected, I'll be getting full custody of our son. You'll be lucky if you see him on weekends. Lisa broke down, sobbing. Henry, please, I made a mistake. I love you, I do. We can work through this. I shook my head, my voice steady. You don't love me, Lisa. You love the life I gave you. And now that life is over. John stumbled out of the house that night, a broken man. Lisa begged and pleaded, but I packed her bags and told her to leave. By morning, she was gone. I didn't feel victorious, not yet, but I felt free. I had taken control of my life again, and that was all that mattered. It's funny how quickly life changes when you finally take out the trash. The day after Lisa left and John was effectively cut out of my life, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Sure, there was anger, pain, and a tinge of bitterness, but above all, there was clarity. I was no longer tangled in a web of lies, no longer carrying the burden of betrayal. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe. The first thing I did was refocus on the company. John had been dead weight for years, and his absence made it clear just how much he'd been dragging us down. I assembled my team, loyal, hardworking professionals who had always been in the background, and gave them the reins to help me restructure. Together, we streamlined operations, brought in new clients, and even expanded into a few untapped markets John had ignored. Within months, profits surged. Without John's toxic influence, the company culture transformed. Employees who had once walked on eggshells around him now thrived. I saw potential in people I hadn't noticed before, and I rewarded their hard work with promotions and bonuses. The business became stronger, leaner, and more innovative than ever. The divorce with Lisa was swift and merciless. Thanks to the prenup and the evidence I'd collected, she walked away with the bare minimum. No alimony, no lavish settlement. Just enough to get by. The custody agreement was even more satisfying. I gained full custody of our son, Ethan, while Lisa was granted visitation rights. Ethan, who had been blissfully unaware of the drama, adjusted quickly to the new normal. I made sure his life stayed as stable and happy as possible. As for Lisa, she tried to reach out a few times, apologizing, pleading, even claiming she wanted to start over. I didn't take the bait. Her crocodile tears meant nothing to me anymore. Every time her number flashed on my phone, I ignored it. She'd made her choice, and I'd made mine. John's descent was as swift as it was satisfying. Without the company, he was a man without a purpose. His reputation in the industry was shattered after I made a few quiet calls to mutual connections, letting them know the kind of man he was. No one wanted to work with a backstabbing ex-partner who'd been caught mismanaging funds. I heard through the grapevine that he tried to start a new venture, but it flopped within weeks. His debts piled up, and he eventually had to sell his house. The last I heard, he was working a low-level job at a competitor's firm, miles away from the high-powered life he once enjoyed. With the toxic people out of my life, I focused on building something better, not just for me, but for Ethan. I hired a life coach to help me realign my goals, and started therapy to process everything I'd been through. It wasn't easy, but each session felt like shedding another layer of the pain they'd caused. I also started making time for the things I'd neglected during my marriage. I reconnected with old friends, picked up golf again, and even started volunteering at a local nonprofit that helps small businesses get off the ground. For the first time in years, I felt like me again. 6 months after the dust settled, I met someone new. Her name is Natalie, and she's the kind of person who radiates warmth and kindness. We met through mutual friends at a casual dinner party, and I was instantly struck by her authenticity. She wasn't interested in my money or my status. She liked me for who I was. We started slow, taking time to get to know each other, and over time I realized that not all relationships are built on lies and manipulation. Natalie met Ethan a few months into our relationship, and they hit it off immediately. Watching them bond was a reminder that life, no matter how messy, has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. Looking back, I'm grateful for what happened. Not for the betrayal, that still stings, but for the wake-up call it gave me. I learned that you can't control what others do, but you can control how you respond. Lisa and John tried to break me, but they underestimated my resilience. I didn't just survive their betrayal, I thrived because of it. Now, my life is mine again. My business is booming, my son is happy, and I've found someone who truly values me. Revenge might have been sweet, but the real victory was reclaiming my peace and proving to myself that no matter how bad things get, you can always rise above. Lisa and John's lives continued to unravel. Lisa moved in with her sister, struggling to find a job that matched the lifestyle she once had. John, still floundering, occasionally tried to contact me, sending emails filled with hollow apologies. I never replied. As for me, I'm thriving. Revenge might have been the spark, but rebuilding my life was the fire that kept me going. And now, every day feels like a reminder that letting go of toxic people is the greatest power move of all.